Tobago economic outlook. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn my attention to the Tobago economy. The most recent data provided by the Economic Management Research Unit in the Division of Finance, Trade and Economy indicate that Tobago's GDP at constant prices fell by 7% in 2020 relative to 2019 and rose by approximately 4% to an estimated 1.7 billion in 2021 relative to 2020. The positive improvement in 2021 has been largely attributed to the gradual reopening of the island's economy in 2021, as well as increased government spending. Madam Presiding Officer, it's worth noting here, in the last decade, between 2011 and 2021, there were 7 years of declines in GDP to the point where the island's constant price GDP in 2021 was equivalent to that of 2011. This means that the economic pie did not increase. However, modest GDP growth is expected in 2022 and 2023. The data also indicates that the state sector was the largest contributor to Tobago's GDP in 2021, accounting for approximately 48% of the island's GDP. The second largest contributor was the finance, insurance, real estate, and business services sector, accounting for about 28%. The tourism sector was the third largest sector, accounting for about 10%, only 10% of GDP in 2021. Finally, the data suggests that agriculture and manufacturing sectors were relatively small, collectively contributing about 2% to Tobago's GDP in 2021, with agriculture contribution amounting to a mere $18.7 million. Now, read accurately, Tobago's GDP data speak loudly to continued underperformance of the Tobago economy and the urgent need for budgetary allocations to focus heavily on productivity growth, income generation, and the development of competitive export capacity. Thank God PDP win this election. Madam Presiding Officer, shifting my attention to the labor market conditions in Tobago, I wish to note that the entity charged with the legal responsibility to produce labor market data for the country, the Central Statistical Office, continues to produce these data with significant lags. The latest labor market data for the country and for Tobago are only available up to the first quarter of 2021. You see why we need our own statistical office? This situation is untenable and must be addressed frontally in the shortest possible time. Madam Presiding Officer, we cannot plan effectively without current and reliable data. And Madam Presiding Officer, the most recent labor market data suggests that unemployment in Tobago for the first quarter of 2021 was approximately 3%, a figure which is significantly below the national figure of 7%. The share of the labor force employed in the government sector stood about 54%, with the private sector employing about 46%. Comparatively, the share of the national labor force in the government sector stood at 28%, with the private sector employing about 72%. Madam Presiding Officer, the share of the island's labor force with tertiary education as the highest level of attainment stood at 17%. The share with secondary education as the highest level of attainment was recorded as 55%, and the share with primary education as the highest level of attainment was about 28%. The levels of education and skills point to an economy with weak capacity to adjust in a self-reliant way to the competitive challenges of economic development in the national and global market process. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn my attention to prices and inflation. The data above point to an economy that is virtually defenseless in the face of the threat of inflation imported from the rest of the nation and the world. The most recent data on prices available from the central bank suggests that Tobago recorded headline and food price inflation in March 2022 of 3.9% and 6.3% respectively. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy, was recorded at 3.5%. Given trends in the national and international markets, the forecast is for continued rising inflation in fiscal 2023. Madam Presiding Officer, this signals the need to boost our defense against inflation and protect the population from the falling real standard of living it invariably brings. Now turning my attention to the operations of the THA. Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to highlight the fact that central government transfers to the Assembly have typically been significantly below the amounts requested. On average, on an annual basis, the THA requested 4.8 billion, but received 2.3 billion for the fiscal years 2017 to 2022, which is approximately 47% of its overall budgetary request. Significantly, the fall in recurrent expenditure for the period averaged 36%, while the shortfall in development expenditure was about 84%. Additionally, Madam Presiding Officer, a disproportionate share of the allocation was assigned to recurrent expenditure. Specifically, on average, 88% of the allocation was assigned to recurrent expenditure, with about 12%, on average about $272 million per year, being assigned to the development expenditure for the periods 2017 to 2022. $272 million amounts to an underinvestment in Tobago's development. It cannot finance the launch of serious development programs in Tobago. Urgent steps are needed to address this investment deficit starting in fiscal 2023. Moreover, Madam Presiding Officer, annual revenues collected in Tobago averaged $226.4 million for the period 2015 to 2020, roughly 10% of Tobago's actual allocation from the central government for that period, and 13% of the Tobago's GDP. Madam Presiding Officer, as I indicated to this House, the total liabilities of the Assembly as at December 2021 stood at $738.1 million. In addition to this, there were contingent liabilities in respect of the bond financing, which amounts to $215.8 million payable by 2027. This means that the total liability of the Assembly was in the vicinity of $954 million, which is about 57% of Tobago's estimated GDP for 2021. Overall, the data on liabilities point to the urgent need to grow Tobago's GDP and for an allocation to service these liabilities to avoid an emerging debt crisis. In general, the outlook for Tobago is one populated with challenges, and there are mounting calls for an intensification of the steps towards economic development which my administration has started. In addition, Madam Presiding Officer, like the outlook for the international, regional, and the national economies, the Tobago outlook also signals an urgent need for budget allocations in fiscal 2023 to begin the process of strengthening the diversification and development foundations of the Tobago economy and, by extension, the national economy. In other words, the Tobago economy, if done right, can save the national economy. Allow me to highlight a few of the policy actions taken by this administration since assuming office. Madam Presiding Officer, the data and findings unearthed from our international, regional, and domestic inquiries so far point to the need for the intensification of the basic needs approach my administration instituted since assuming control of the Assembly. Having witnessed and noted the devastating impact of COVID-19 and the attendant disruption of lives and livelihoods on assuming office, Madam Presiding Officer, my administration took the deliberate policy decision to provide for the basic needs of Tobagonians with severe fiscal constraints inherited from our predecessors. Policy decisions were taken in the following areas: health, housing, food, education, debt management, and support for businesses. In health, Madam Presiding Officer, you will recall that when this administration took office in December 2021, our COVID-19 health challenge was at its peak. However, we took immediate action, and through our COVID-19 strategic response, we were able to drastically reduce the number of deaths and hospitalizations. We expanded our capacity to properly store and look after bodies of the casualties of COVID-19, which reduced the pressure on loved ones, families, and friends. We increased the COVID-19 vaccination uptake, Madam Presiding Officer, and most critically, we strengthened our medical care capabilities at the intensive care unit at the Scarborough General Hospital. We established a pure parallel system for COVID-19 patients at the old hospital, thereby reducing patients' exposure. In addition, we improved COVID-19 home care by creating and distributing physiotherapist-led breathing exercises along with improved reporting and communication tools. Madam Presiding Officer, we saved lives. Additionally, from December 10th to May 31st, 2022, we distributed 222 general assistance grants through health, valued at $1.4 million for relief and assistance in the area of medical care, burials, food, clothing, household items, and home rental. In housing, we have given out home improvement grants to several households. Tomorrow, we will distribute an additional $9.7 million in grants to 700 plus households in the single largest home improvement grant distribution in THA's history. Madam Presiding Officer, many of these households have been waiting for years and have become very frustrated with the process. They get first check and can't get a second check. Years passing. PDP will fix that tomorrow. It is for these reasons that the Executive Council took the decision to clear the backlog by making the payments. Since then, the process has been reviewed and a new and cleaner process has been put in place. Our aim is to deliver the much needed support to our most vulnerable in their time of need. In addition, we have already assigned 54 service lots to Tobagonians, and as a result of our first draw for lots at Riseland Housing Development. In terms of food and food security, there is a need for a long-term solution to the current global food shortages, and so we have taken the decision to accelerate our capacity and capability to produce alternative flours and to promote household production of fresh vegetables while building out the island's food security and sovereignty systems. As we must have all heard by now, National Flour Mills increased its price of flour by 33% as of yesterday, resulting in a 28% increase for citizens. Madam Presiding Officer, this is even more justification for this strategic decision. The food card program, based on the findings of the 2021 special audit, was transferred from the Division of Finance, Trade and Economy, where it did not belong, to the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection, where it belongs. And I assure you, Madam Presiding Officer, that this is one Secretary of Finance that does not have a vote in his office with food cards to give out as he pleases. No Auditor General calling my name. Work is being done with our bankers as we speak to upgrade the program to the e-wallet model. And when completed, the THA will have in the country the single largest e-wallet system for the transferal of funds for social protection. In education, we have reinstated in-person teaching and learning at all our schools. Relatedly, we returned the school feeding and nutrition program to full capacity from the first week of school reopening, providing meals for all students in the program at the preschool, primary, and secondary school levels. In collaboration between the Divisions of Health and Education, we designed and implemented COVID-19 protocols at all our schools. We provided remote learning devices for over 1,000 primary and secondary students. We upgraded our school transportation program in keeping with the new policy that was developed by the Division of Education, Research and Technology. We provided grants to the tune of $1.6 million to maxi-taxi owners contracted under the school transportation program to assist them with the required safety upgrades and maintenance. Further, we have already made $21 million available to the Division of Education, Research and Technology to conduct extensive school repairs during the 2022 July-August vacation. I am advised that this is the single largest July-August school repair program that the THA will be having in its history. This is well justified as the plants were closed for 2 years. In terms of debt management, to ascertain the correctness of the debts inherited, I commissioned a forensic audit in the programs associated with those liabilities. The audit should be completed by September 2022, much later than we hoped for, but that deadline is necessary to facilitate the volume of work. And in the interest of transparency and open government, the findings will be made public. And where the evidence points to infractions of the law, the culprits will be prosecuted. Notwithstanding, I have given a public commitment to provide compensation in small parts for the works completed in these projects. We understand that many contractors, unfortunately, got tied up by the wrongdoings of the past administration. Sure. but our legal team and auditors have advised that we can only provide small payments at this time so as to not jeopardize the outcomes. As an immediate response to these inherited fiscal constraints, I established a debt management committee in the Division of Finance, Trade and Economy. This committee has been gathering information on coefficient and implementable modalities and has submitted an interim report which is being actioned. Madam Presiding Officer, our goal is to manage the liquidation of these liabilities without compromising or upending our current and future development agenda for the island. Support for businesses. In recognition of the lethal damage COVID-19 has inflicted on the Tobago business community, I commissioned the Economic Management and Research Unit in the Division of Finance, Trade and Economy to conduct a study on the impact of the pandemic on businesses in Tobago and to identify practical, implementable, and affordable solutions as to how the Assembly could further assist towards ensuring the indigenous business community. Madam Presiding Officer, the preliminary results from the study indicate that during the COVID-19 pandemic, some 40% of our businesses experienced challenges meeting their payrolls, and some 37% their obligations to financial institutions, occasioned by reductions in sales up to 89%, shortage of cash flow up to 63%, and disruption in the supply of raw materials or inputs up to 35%. Madam Presiding Officer, these challenges have been identified as the major threats to the Tobago business community. As Chief Secretary and Secretary with direct responsibility for the development and management of the Tobago economy, I have been having extensive discussions with some of the leading banks and non-bank financial institutions with the aim of mitigating the harmful effects the pandemic has had and continues to have on businesses on the island. At the same time, the Division of Finance, Trade and Economy is in direct discussion with some commercial banks with the aim of co-creating a Tobago-specific cash flow solution. We are currently, meaning at this very moment, preparing a THA-backed $60 million liquidity facility to facilitate the island's business sector to recover from the adverse effects of the pandemic, along with practical and affordable ways of increasing the volume of domestic, regional, and international visitors to the island. This has been a snapshot of the policy actions taken, and my colleagues will present much more during the debate. I will not set out in detail my administration's policy agenda for fiscal 2023. I have said repeatedly in many places that the aim, or more aptly, ambition of my administration is to make Tobago the greatest little island on the planet. It is to develop every child, every family, and every village in Tobago. Yes. Madam Presiding Officer, this administration recognizes and acknowledges that for development to be meaningful, it must be ultimately positively impact the lives and quality of life of Tobagonians. In other words, Madam Presiding Officer, development is about improving people's welfare. Our vision for Tobago is as an island with the following attributes. Allow me to lay out the attributes of the greatest little island on the planet. Tell them. Number one, Madam Presiding Officer, a per capita income and standard of living that surpass those of other small island states. Number two, a highly educated and innovative population. Number 3, a technologically driven, innovative, productive, resilient, and competitive economy. Yes. Number 4, an efficient, effective, and accountable public service. Number 5, a modern, scientific, and efficient healthcare sector. Yes. Number 6, constitutional autonomy within the Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Number 7, every Tobagonian having opportunities for self-actualization. Number 8, protection and caring for the most vulnerable. Number 9, a population that is united, peaceful, safe, and secure. Number 10, green and modern state-of-the-art public infrastructure. Yes. And number 11, open, transparent, accountable, and inclusive governance, unlike what we have seen before. Madam Presiding Officer, despite the old, unproductive noises coming from our political opponents and distractors, always. Are we hearing some today? Yes. Who have had their day and who were comprehensively rejected by the people. My team and I will continue to chart and implement a progressive, innovative, and people-friendly course. Yes. In keeping with our vision for Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer, the budget statement for fiscal 2023, the first installment of the longer-term development goal of making Tobago the greatest little island on the planet, is themed towards a smarter, greener, more autonomous Tobago. Yeah. And just in case you were just closing your fridge door, close it properly. Repeat. Sip your water. And let me repeat the theme for fiscal 2023, or the first installation of our agenda of making the greatest little island on the planet. The theme for this fiscal year coming is towards a smarter, greener, more autonomous Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, we are starting now. Accordingly, the core development framework and the strategic priority areas for growth, development, and transformation in fiscal 2023 will be the focus of the remainder of this section. I will be discussing the following themes: governance reform, economic transformation and business development, tourism sector and the development of the orange economy, food security and sovereignty, the blue economy, human capital development, health and social protection program, community development and empowerment, institutional reform and transformation, development of young people, sport development and recreational infrastructure, public safety, and physical infrastructure development. Madam Presiding Officer, I start with governance reform.